My name is Claire Donovan. I am 35 years old. And while I was drinking coffee in Paris with my fiancé, my phone rang. It was my mother, sobbing, begging me to come home and save my sister's wedding. He didn't pick up. Hours later, TikTok exploded with videos of the groom walking out, my sister screaming at the altar, and my family's empire cracking in public. Everyone wanted to know if I would go back. But the truth is, they only ever called me when there was a fire to put out, and this time, I was not their firefighter. That thought was still clinging to me the next morning, when I found myself staring down at an untouched espresso, the thin layer of foam dissolving into the dark surface. The espresso sat untouched in front of me, its thin layer of foam dissolving into the dark surface. I kept my hands cupped around it, staring down at the ripples as if I could steady myself there. The morning crowd was filling the little square, locals weaving through tourists, pigeons darting under chairs for crumbs. Paris was alive, noisy, careless. And yet inside my chest, everything had gone very still. Daniel didn't push. He just sat back, watching me with that patient quiet of his. I could feel him waiting, giving me space to breathe. The phone lay face down on the table, but I could still feel it vibrating under my skin. My mother's voice clung to me like smoke. You know your duty. You've always been the strong one. The words dragged me back to a dozen other moments. I was 15 when Hannah failed her driver's test the first time and locked herself in the bathroom. Mom had pounded on my door instead, telling me to coax her out. You're the steady one, Claire. She needs you. I had spent an hour sitting on the other side of the locked door, talking Hannah through her tears until she finally opened it. By the time I left for college, I had a whole library of such memories. Me soothing, me solving, me erasing fires before they spread. And now, across an ocean. She still expected me to do it again. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low. What do you want to do, Claire? Not what she wants. You? The question landed harder than I expected. I had been trained for so long to react, to respond, to run toward the problem before anyone else could. But what did I want? I looked at him and saw no demand in his eyes, only space. I let out a shaky laugh, more bitter than amused. I want to drink my coffee, walk by the river, and not be anyone's firefighter. Daniel smiled. Not the wide grin he saved for friends, but the quiet one that meant he understood. Then that is what we do. I picked up the phone and saw 3 new missed calls already. All from Mom. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could picture her pacing the kitchen in Portland, clutching the cordless, rehearsing lines about loyalty and family. I set the phone back down without answering. The waiter returned with 2 fresh croissants, the buttery scent wrapping around us. Daniel tore his in half and offered me a piece. I took it, the flaky crust scattering crumbs across the table. For a few minutes we ate in silence. Around us life continued, unbothered by family drama continents away. Still, the quiet didn't last long inside me. I could hear Hannah's name echoing in my head, layered with my mother's sobs. Hannah in pieces. Hannah humiliated. Hannah needing me. That old guilt flared, the one that told me if I didn't step in, something irreparable would happen. I pushed the croissant aside. Daniel caught the shift in my face instantly. Say it, he urged. I exhaled hard. What if they're right? What if, without me, everything falls apart? Daniel leaned closer, folding his arms on the table. Maybe it does. Maybe it already has. But that doesn't make it your responsibility to build it back. I stared at him, my throat tightening. Do you know how hard it is to unlearn being the fixer? Yes, he said simply. I've watched you carry it. And I've watched it crush you. The words cracked something open. I glanced around the square. At couples laughing. At a little boy chasing pigeons. How many of them had families who didn't call, only when disaster struck? How many knew what it felt like to be loved for existing, not for repairing? My phone buzzed again. I grabbed it, but this time it wasn't Mom. A message from my cousin Tori flashed across the screen. Just saw your sister's name trending. Hope you're okay. Don't let them drag you in again. Proud of you. The knot in my chest loosened slightly. Someone saw me. Someone outside the cycle understood. Daniel glanced at the message and raised an eyebrow. Seems like you're not as invisible as they'd like you to believe. I tucked the phone back into my bag. For the first time, I didn't feel the reflex to run. The bells of Sacré-Cœur chimed faintly up the hill, the sound floating across the rooftops. Daniel stood and reached for my hand. Come on, let's walk. We wandered through the narrow streets, past painters setting up their easels and vendors arranging scarves in neat rows. The air smelled of fresh bread and car exhaust, a strange mix that somehow fit the city perfectly. Daniel kept my hand in his thumb brushing lightly over my knuckles. Every few steps, my mind tried to circle back to my mother's voice. But each time it did, the noise of Paris pushed against it. Children laughing. A musician tuning his guitar. The hiss of espresso machines. It reminded me there was more to life than the demands of a family that only called when they needed. At the corner, Daniel stopped and looked at me squarely. Claire, you have a right to live without answering every alarm they ring. His words were so simple, but they landed like truth I had been waiting years to hear. I squeezed his hand, feeling the pulse of relief run through me. We reached the steps that spilled down toward the city. From here, the rooftop stretched endlessly, the Eiffel Tower cutting the skyline in the distance. The view was breathtaking. But what caught me was the silence inside my head. For the first time in years, it wasn't filled with orders, guilt, or frantic planning. I turned to Daniel and whispered, maybe I don't have to go back. He pulled me close, his voice steady and sure. You don't. You have a choice. Claire, they don't get to order your life. I let the words settle into me, heavy and freeing all at once. And for the first time, I believed them. The rooftops of Paris blurred under the sunlight as I let my gaze drift across the skyline. It was beautiful. Overwhelming even. But my chest carried a different weight. One that had nothing to do with the city stretched out before me. Memories had a way of sneaking in when I least expected them, clawing their way to the surface the moment I let my guard down. I was 8 the year Hannah turned 4. The year my parents threw her a birthday party that seemed to stretch across the whole neighborhood. Balloons were tied to every chair. The cake was twice her size, and our yard was crowded with relatives, neighbors, and friends of friends. I remember standing in the corner clutching a store-bought doll, watching her drown in presents and attention. When it was my turn 2 months later, there was no party. Mom said we were too busy, that money was tight, that Hannah needed new shoes. I blew out candles on a cupcake at the kitchen table while everyone else kept talking about Hannah's new ballet class. By the time I was 10, I had stopped expecting things to be even. Hannah cried, and the world rearranged itself to soothe her. I cried, and the sound just disappeared into the walls. The sharpest memory was my piano recital. I had practiced for months, fingers stiff and sore from endless scales. The auditorium filled with other parents clutching bouquets, their cameras flashing when their children bowed. I kept scanning the back row, waiting for Mom and Dad to appear. They never did. Later that night I found out Hannah had spiked a low fever. Nothing serious. And the entire household had turned its attention to her. Nobody asked how the recital went. Nobody noticed. I had tucked the participation ribbon deep into my backpack. Even then I told myself it was fine. I was the older one, the strong one, the responsible one. But strength felt more like invisibility than anything else. Daniel squeezed my hand gently as we descended the steps of Sacré-Cœur. He did not need to ask where my head had gone. He had heard enough of these stories to recognize the shadow that crossed my face when old wounds bled through. We walked slowly, pausing to look at paintings spread on blankets along the street. Tourists crowded around a caricature artist sketching a couple, the laughter bubbling like champagne. It reminded me of Hannah again, how she had been painted as the golden one since birth, the perfect daughter, the one with promise and grace. My father, Richard Donovan, had never stepped in to correct it. He sat quietly at the table, while Mom bragged about Hannah's decorating talents and her endless charm. He said nothing when I was overlooked, when my report cards went unnoticed, when I was asked to step aside for yet another of Hannah's dramatic breakdowns. His silence built walls around me thicker than any words could. I sometimes wondered if he even saw me, or if he had simply trained himself to look past me in order to keep peace with my mother. That silence became the backdrop of our house. Valerie filled it with demands. Hannah filled it with tears. And I filled it with effort that no one acknowledged. It shaped me more than I realized, taught me that to be loved, I had to be useful. That to be safe, I had to be quiet. Daniel pulled me toward a small cafe at the bottom of the hill, insisting on ordering another drink. While he stood at the counter, I checked my phone out of habit. The screen lit with a new message from a cousin I barely spoke to anymore. It was a photo. Grainy but clear enough. Hannah stood in front of a mirror in a bridal boutique, layers of ivory satin spilling around her feet. Her smile stretched across her face as if she owned the world. The caption read simply, "The perfect bride." I stared at it longer than I meant to, my throat tightening. Perfect. Perfect, because the world bent to her. Perfect, because everyone else made sacrifices to protect her shine. I whispered under my breath, "Perfect for who?" Daniel returned with 2 cappuccinos and slid one in front of me. His eyes flicked to the phone in my hand. Another message from them. "A cousin," I said softly, showing off Hannah. "She looks flawless." Of course. Daniel took a sip of his drink, his gaze steady. Flawless is easy when someone else carries the weight. I wanted to laugh, but it caught in my throat. He reached across the table and closed my fingers around the cup. The warmth seeped into my skin, grounding me. For a moment I let myself believe that maybe perfection was not about flawless gowns or curated images, but about being seen without conditions. I took a long breath and let it out slowly, watching the foam collapse against the side of the cup. Around us, the street hummed with chatter. Scooters buzzing past, children tugging on their parents' hands. The world moved forward without pausing for my sister's theatrics. Still, the picture burned in my mind. The perfect bride, the golden child, the same old story. And me, still standing at the edges, wondering if I would ever stop feeling invisible. The cappuccino tasted faintly of chocolate. I let it linger on my tongue, trying to anchor myself in the present. Daniel was here. Paris was here. My life was here. And yet part of me remained back in Portland, in that old house where silence covered the walls thicker than paint, where my father turned pages of a newspaper instead of defending me, where my mother's voice rose and fell like a gavel deciding who mattered. I set the cup down and wiped my palms against my skirt. The message still sat on my phone. Hannah glowing in white. The caption seared into the image. Perfect bride. Perfect life. Perfectly. And all I could think was, perfect for who? Daniel suggested we walk by the river, and I agreed, letting him guide me down toward the Seine. The streets narrowed, spilling us into a wide view of the water where boats drifted lazily and tourists leaned over the rails, snapping photos. The afternoon light turned the surface silver, and for a moment, it was easy to believe we were far from every problem waiting across the Atlantic. He slipped his arm around my shoulders as we strolled. I leaned into him, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne, mixed with the air that carried traces of bread from bakeries and the dampness of the river. My heart slowed in rhythm with the city around me, but it did not stay calm for long. The phone rang again. I didn't even need to check the screen. Daniel gave me a look. Par question. Part warning. I sighed and picked up. My mother's voice was strained, thick with tears. Claire, please. You cannot stay there while everything falls apart here. If you do not come home now, the whole family will lose face. Hannah is unraveling. The Miles family is furious. Do you understand what this means for us? I stopped walking, staring at the iron rail of the bridge we had just reached. The tourists around me blurred into background noise. All I could hear was her desperation. Not for me, Not about me, but about appearances, about honor and saving face. Mom, I said slowly, I am in Paris. This is my life. My time, Hannah's wedding, is her responsibility, not mine. She gasped, like I had struck her. How can you speak that way? We are your family. She is your sister. If you do not come back, we will be humiliated. You are the strong one. Claire. You know how to handle these things. I felt the heat rising in my chest. The same script. The same lines. It had always been me who knew how to handle things. Who carried the weight. Who patched the cracks no one else wanted to see. Daniel took the phone gently from my hand and pressed the speaker button. His voice was calm, but firm, echoing just enough in the open air to make me stand taller. Valérie, we are in Paris. Claire does not owe anyone a rescue mission. No one has the obligation to clean up Hannah's mistakes. There was a pause on the line, long enough that I could hear the wind pushing through the phone speaker. Then my mother's tone shifted, sharp and cold beneath the tears. You should not interfere in family matters. Daniel. Claire knows where her duty lies. I closed my eyes. The words cut, but they no longer anchored themselves the way they used to. Maybe because I could feel Daniel's hand warm on the small of my back. Maybe because the city around me pulsed with life that had nothing to do with my mother's demands. I said softly, almost to myself, I am not a firefighter anymore. Mom didn't hear it or chose not to. Her voice cracked again, heavy with dramatics. Do you want to watch your sister's life collapse? Do you want this family destroyed because of your pride? Something snapped inside me. My pride. That was her word for it. Every sacrifice I had made, every silence I had swallowed, every time I had stepped aside so Hannah could shine, all dismissed as pride. The moment I refused to bend again, I lifted the phone, staring at the screen as if it could answer me. Daniel squeezed my hand. Steady and unflinching, I said clearly, Mom, I cannot do this anymore. And I ended the call. The sound of the disconnect was final. A small click that echoed louder than her entire monologue. I held the phone in my hand, breathing hard. Around me, the world did not end. The boats kept drifting. The children kept laughing. The sky kept spilling light across the river. Daniel turned me toward him, his eyes steady on mine. You did the right thing. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My chest felt lighter. Not empty, but unburdened. It was as if the air in Paris had shifted, opening a space just for me. We leaned against the rail together, watching a couple rowing past on a small boat. They were laughing, water splashing up against the sides, their voices carefree. I wondered what it would feel like to live a life where joy was not rationed, where love did not come with conditions or expectations. Daniel brushed his thumb along my hand. You have a right to stay here. To choose this. I nodded, tears pricking the corners of my eyes but not spilling. For the first time, someone was standing beside me. Not demanding, not correcting, just standing. We walked again. Slower now, the tension bleeding out of my shoulders. Paris unfolded around us with its bridges and lampposts, its artists and chatter, its endless reminder that the world was larger than the cage I had been placed in. I slid the phone back into my bag and felt a strange calm settle in my chest. The call was over. But more than that, the pattern was broken. For once, I had not rushed to rescue. For once, I had let the fire burn without throwing myself into it. We stopped at another corner cafe. Daniel ordered 2 glasses of wine, and we sat outside watching the city move. I sipped slowly, letting the warmth spread through me, and realized that this moment might be the first time in years I truly felt someone was on my side. The streetlights flickered on as the sky deepened, casting a soft glow across the cafe terrace. The wine was smooth and full, and for a little while I let myself sink into the rhythm of Parisian evenings. The low hum of conversations, the clink of silverware, the faint strains of music carried on the breeze. Daniel leaned back in his chair, one arm draped casually over the backrest, watching me with that quiet attentiveness that always made me feel steadier. When my phone buzzed again, I hesitated. It wasn't my mother this time. Not a cousin either. A notification from TikTok flashed across the screen. Trending tag with a name that made my stomach twist. Olivia Rhodes. I knew the name from Hannah's endless bragging. A stylist with a big following. Someone Hannah had paid far more than she could afford just to secure the perfect look for her wedding. Against my better judgment, I opened the app. Olivia sat in front of a vanity mirror. Ring light gleaming. Her voice lowered like she was whispering secrets to the world. She said she had just styled a bride who was spiraling. Unable to keep her composure. She never named Hannah. But the hints dripped through her words. An upscale wedding. A family with money and reputation. A ceremony in chaos, before it had even begun. The comments were already piling up. Some speculated about who it was, tossing out names of women from wealthy families on the West Coast. One comment caught my eye. Sounds like the Donovans. Always acting bigger than they are. My breath stalled. I scrolled again. Heart thudding faster. More comments echoed the same suspicion. It wasn't confirmed. Not yet. But people were circling close. Like sharks tasting blood. Daniel leaned over, reading the screen with me. His brow furrowed. That's her stylist. Isn't it? I nodded. Unable to pull my eyes away, he reached out and clicked the phone off, sliding it across the table. Don't let them drag you in. Claire. Let them eat each other alive if that's what happens. I tried to listen, but my pulse was still racing. For years I had carried their secrets, shielded their messes, and now the cracks were spilling out into the open. The thought of strangers dissecting our family name on a public platform made me both sick and strangely relieved. The waiter refilled our glasses, and Daniel steered the conversation toward lighter things. He asked about the places I wanted to see tomorrow, whether we should go to the Musée d'Orsay or just wander along the Seine again. I tried to answer, but part of me was still caught in that glow of the phone screen. In the comments that whispered the truth I had known all my life. Later, back at the hotel, I sat at the small desk by the window and opened my laptop. The Eiffel Tower glittered in the distance, its lights blinking against the dark. I logged into my email, half expecting another storm of family drama. But what I found made me blink in disbelief. Congratulations! The subject line read. It was from one of our clients in New York. I opened it and scanned quickly. My agency had just secured a new contract. A marketing campaign worth $2 million. My chest tightened as I read the words. A swell of pride rising in me. Years of building from nothing. Of nights when I wasn't sure if I could keep payroll. Of carrying the weight alone while no one in my family bothered to ask how I was doing. Had led to this. Daniel came out of the bathroom. Towel draped around his shoulders. What's that look on your face? We just landed the Brennan account. I said, still staring at the email. $2 million. He grinned. Walked over. And kissed the top of my head. That's incredible. You did that? Claire. I nodded slowly. My throat tightening. I wanted to cry. Not because of the money, but because not one person in my family would care. They would never even ask. To them, I was still the invisible one. The background character. The problem solver when they snapped their fingers. I closed the laptop and turned toward Daniel. I wanted to tell him everything. The years of being dismissed. The way success tasted bittersweet when the people who should have celebrated with me never even saw it. Instead, I just let the words slip out. Low and bitter. At home, I'm still just the useless one. The silence stretched, broken only by the muffled sound of traffic below. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, watching me with steady eyes. No, he said quietly. At home they chose not to see you. That's not the same as useless. I pressed my lips together, fighting the burn behind my eyes. Outside, the tower lights flickered again. Brilliant and fleeting. For once, I let myself feel the truth of what he said, even if part of me still didn't believe it. The phone rang again just as I was pulling the curtains shut. I almost ignored it, thinking it would be my mother or one of her messengers. But the name on the screen made me pause. Evelyn Whitaker. My grandmother. I hadn't spoken to her in months. She had stepped back from family gatherings years ago, her silence more of a protest than surrender. I answered. My voice, Claudius. Grandma. Her tone was raspy but steady, carrying the weight of someone who had been holding words too long. Claire. Sweetheart. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, I said, glancing at Daniel. He gave me a curious look, but stayed quiet. There was a pause, and then she exhaled slowly. I need to tell you something, and I should have done it years ago. It is about your grandfather's estate. My stomach nodded instantly. That topic had always been foggy. Whispered about, but never clarified. I sat down on the edge of the bed. What about it? Your grandfather updated his will in 2015. Evelyn said. He left the Monterey house and his remaining shares in Whitaker Holdings to you. You. Claire. Not your mother. Not Caroline. He wanted you to have them. The room tilted. I pressed a hand against my knee, grounding myself. But Mom told us everything went to her and Aunt Caroline. That there was no question. That was the lie she wanted everyone to believe. Evelyn's voice sharpened. Still low, but cut with iron. The signed version, the final one, was with our family attorney, Ava Monroe. She witnessed it herself. But when your grandfather passed, your mother manipulated the situation. She convinced Ava to keep it hidden. She said it would tear the family apart if anyone knew. My pulse pounded in my ears. Pieces of the past rearranged themselves in an instant, the sideways glances, the whispers about shares, the way my mother had brushed me off whenever I asked questions. It had never made sense. And now it did. Horribly so. Why now? I whispered. Why are you telling me this now? Because I saw your name online, Evelyn said. I saw the way they erased you, and I realized you have been carrying weight that was never yours. I am sorry. Claire. I should have stood up to them sooner. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. The Eiffel Tower glittered beyond the window, the lights blurring through my unshed tears. Daniel sat beside me silently, waiting. What happens now? I asked finally. Ava still has the documents. I have already spoken to her. She intends to file a motion in Sacramento to reinstate the true will. You will hear from her soon. Evelyn's voice wavered for the first time. Justice cannot be buried forever. The words landed heavy. Rearranging the map of my life. Monterey House. The estate I had loved visiting as a child. The place I thought had been taken from me without explanation. Shares in Whitaker Holdings. The family company I had been excluded from. The one Hannah bragged about, as if it was her birthright. All of it had been mine. Stolen quietly through silence and manipulation. I did not speak for a long time. Daniel wrapped an arm around my shoulders, grounding me as the air shifted with the weight of the revelation. Finally, I managed. Thank you for telling me. Evelyn sounded tired but resolute. I should have done it sooner. But now the truth is yours. When we ended the call, I sat still, staring at the dark glass of the window. Daniel waited, giving me space. Say something, he whispered finally. I laughed once. Sharp and hollow. Everything makes sense now. Why they kept me close enough to use, but far enough to discard. Why? I was never allowed near the company. Why Monterey House vanished from conversation. Daniel's grip tightened. They robbed you. Yes, I said, my voice breaking. And they made me believe I never mattered enough to ask. For years I had carried that quiet ache, never being chosen, always being the one to hold the broken pieces. Now I realized I had been more than overlooked. I had been deliberately erased. I stood and began pacing, the floor creaking under my steps. Flashes of childhood summers at Monterey House filled my mind. The wide porch where I read books under the sun. The orchard where Hannah once cried because she fell. And I carried her back while our mother rushed only to her side. That house had been my sanctuary. And it was meant to be mine all along. I pressed my hands against my face, forcing air into my lungs. Daniel rose and caught my wrists gently. Look at me, Claire. This is not the end. This is the beginning. His steadiness pierced the storm in my head. I lowered my hands and met his gaze. "You don't want revenge," I whispered. "I just want it to stop." "Then let it stop," he said firmly. "Let the truth speak for itself." I sank into his chest, breathing in the calm that radiated from him. My grandmother's words echoed again. Clear and resolute. Justice cannot be buried forever. For the first time in years, I believed it might be true. The next day, Paris was bathed in pale sunlight, the kind that softened the stone walls and made the Seine look like it was carrying pieces of sky. Daniel and I had walked down to a cafe near the Pont Neuf, hoping for a quiet breakfast. I was stirring honey into my tea when my phone buzzed so violently against the table that the spoon clattered. I almost ignored it. After so many calls from Valerie, I had learned to silence the sound in my head. But this wasn't a call. It was a flood of notifications from TikTok. The screen lit with trending tags that made my pulse quicken. Miles' family. Rehearsal dinner chaos. Dono fan drama. I unlocked it with a shaking hand. The first video that appeared was filmed in a crowded banquet hall, strung with fairy lights and floral arrangements. The caption read, "Rehearsal dinner went off the rails." Hannah's voice was unmistakable. Shrill and breaking. Carrying across the long table, she stood with her hands gripping the edge of the linen as if she could hold the night together by force. Across from her, Trevor Miles' jaw tightened. He looked like a man barely containing his rage. Then in one sudden motion, he shoved his chair back. The scrape loud, even through the shaky recording. He tossed his napkin aside and stormed out of frame. Two groomsmen scrambling after him. Gasps filled the background. Silverware clinking as guests whispered and shifted uncomfortably. The video cut off abruptly. But another one played immediately. This angle caught Hannah chasing after Trevor a few steps, her voice cracking as she shouted, "It isn't my fault. He's overreacting. Someone stop him." Mascara streaked down her cheeks, and the perfect bride image dissolved in real time. My stomach flipped. Daniel leaned in, his hand steady on mine. "That's not just a rumor anymore. That's real." I scrolled, unable to stop myself. More clips appeared. Guests recording from different tables, piecing together the collapse of what was supposed to be a carefully curated night. Some captions were cruel, others gleeful, but the theme was the same. The bride was unraveling, and the groom wanted out. Then my phone buzzed again. Valérie. I stared at the name as if it were carved into the glass. Daniel shook his head softly. "You don't need to pick it up." The ringing went on and on. Drilling into my chest, I could almost hear what she would say without answering. "Claire. This is your fault for not being here. Claire. You must fix this before the world sees." I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, another call came. I declined it with a quick jab of my thumb. Before I could set the phone down, a new video surfaced. My breath caught when I recognized the figure at the center of the frame. Evelyn. She stood in the middle of the rehearsal dinner, her silver hair catching the lights, her cane planted firmly by her side. The chatter in the room faded into stunned silence as she raised her hand and pointed straight at Hannah. Her voice carried above the noise, sharp and unyielding. "This is the price you pay when you erase your own blood." The room in the clip froze. Someone dropped a glass. The shatter audible. Hannah's face twisted, fury and confusion spilling over as she looked around at the stunned guests. The camera swung wildly, catching fragments of whispers. Before the video cut off, I lowered the phone to the table, my hands trembling. Daniel's voice was low. "Was that your grandmother?" I nodded, throat tight. She never spoke like that. Not in public. Not ever. She had been the quiet one. The one who disappeared from gatherings when Valerie's control grew too sharp. To hear her voice now, to see her break the silence, felt like watching a storm roll through a sky that had been clear too long. For years, I had dreamed of someone in the family acknowledging what had been done to me. Now Evelyn had done it. Not in private, but in front of everyone, and the internet had captured every second. Daniel reached across and covered my hand with his. You don't need to say anything, Claire. She already said it for you. Tears burned the backs of my eyes. I blinked, refusing to let them fall in the middle of a Paris cafe. The city bustled on around us. Waiters balancing trays. Tourists snapping pictures on the bridge. A saxophonist playing low by the river. The world kept spinning while my family's illusion crumbled oceans away. My phone buzzed again. Valeria's name. I turned it face down. Another buzz. Then Caroline. Then an unknown number. They stacked like accusations. I refused to open. I lifted my tea and took a slow sip. It was bitter from steeping too long. But it grounded me. Daniel studied me quietly. So what now? I set the cup down. My voice steady, for the first time in days. Now I let it burn. He nodded once. A faint smile tugging at his mouth. That's what freedom feels like. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of Evelyn's words replay in my head. The price you pay when you erase your own blood. They had erased me, written me out of their picture, treated me as disposable. And now, the cost was arriving. Not because of me, but because of the very lies they built on top of my absence. I picked up my phone one last time, opened TikTok, and saw the views climbing into the millions. Strangers debated in the comments whether the wedding would even happen, whether Trevor had already fled, whether the Donovan family would survive the scandal. I closed the app, slid the phone back into my bag, and let out a long breath. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling to fix what they had broken. I was only a witness, and I had no intention of going back. The morning air in Paris felt sharp and clean when I stepped onto the balcony. The city was just waking. Delivery vans rumbling down the narrow street. The smell of bread drifting from the corner bakery. I thought maybe I could outrun the noise back home. At least for a little while, but my phone buzzed on the table, lighting up with notifications that piled faster than I could. Swipe them away? Daniel opened the glass door behind me, still tousled from sleep. A mug of coffee in his hand. More of them. I nodded and picked up the phone, bracing myself. The first video that played was shaky. Filmed from the back row of a church, decorated in pale roses and string lights. Guests leaned forward. Phones raised like soldiers at attention. Hannah stood at the altar, her gown shimmering under the lights, veil falling over her shoulders. She looked radiant and terrified all at once. Beside her, Trevor Miles stood stiff, his lips pressed tight. The officiant had barely begun speaking when Trevor stepped backward, his face a storm. The room gasped. Hannah reached for his hand, but he shook his head, voice slicing the silence. I would rather walk away now than live a lie for the rest of my life. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as Trevor turned, striding down the aisle past stunned guests. Two groomsmen rushed after him, their faces pale, but he didn't stop. Hannah's scream cracked the air, high and broken. The video ended with the camera jolting as the guest recording it dropped their phone onto their lap. I gripped the railing. My pulse hammered so hard I felt dizzy. Another clip loaded before I could stop it. This one zoomed closer, capturing Hannah's face in brutal clarity. Mascara streaked, mouth twisted, her hands clutching at the air like she could hold the moment together. She shouted his name again, the sound tearing through the perfect facade. The caption burned across the bottom groom runs. Bride collapses. I sank into the chair, covering my mouth with my hand. Daniel set his coffee down and moved behind me, resting his hands on my shoulders. It's all out now, he said. I nodded weakly. Every secret, every layer of polish they used to cover the cracks, gone in an instant. Scrolling, I saw more angles, more edits. Some clips slowed the moment Trevor pulled away, replayed with dramatic music. Others looped Hannah's scream over and over. The comments poured in by the thousands. Bridezilla of the year. He made the smartest choice of his life. I would have run too. I locked the phone, but the words still echoed. Bridezilla of the year, that was my sister now. Reduced to a viral joke. Daniel pulled a chair closer and sat across from me. His eyes were calm, but I saw the memory flicker there before he spoke. Do you remember last Thanksgiving? I frowned. What about it? When your mom told me architecture was just a hobby for rich men, that a real man would find a career that actually mattered, his voice stayed steady. But the words cut, the memory stung. Valerie sipping her wine, dismissing him with a careless smirk. While I sat there swallowing my anger to keep the peace, Daniel leaned forward. His voice firmer now. She tried to reduce me to nothing, the same way she's reduced you your whole life. But the truth is, they never knew us. They never cared to. And I will never forget that moment, because it told me everything I needed to know about what they value. Appearances. Money. Control. Not people. I dropped my gaze. Shame mixing with fury. He reached for my hand across the table. We don't owe them anything. Claire. Not explanations. Not rescues. Not our presence. The strength in his words seeped into me. Shaking something loose, I tightened my grip on his hand. Then we won't go back. Not for this. Not ever. A flicker of relief passed across his face, followed by a quiet certainty. Good. Because we deserve more than their chaos. I leaned back in the chair, the morning air filling my lungs. For the first time, final. Not a threat. Not a question, but a decision. Down below, the bakery door swung open, and the smell of fresh bread rose into the air. People lined up along the sidewalk, laughing softly, carrying on with their lives. The world spun on, indifferent to the drama unraveling back home. I lifted my phone one last time, opening TikTok just to see. The clip of Trevor's declaration had already hit 5 million views. The hashtags multiplied, each one harsher than the last. But instead of dread, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I set the phone down, lacing my fingers through Daniel's. The Paris sky was brightening, and for once, the future did not feel like a burden I was forced to carry. The clatter of delivery trucks echoed off the narrow Parisian street as a baker carried trays of croissants to the cafe below. I tried to focus on the smell of butter and the sight of geraniums spilling from window boxes, but the phone on the table buzzed so violently it rattled against the wood. Daniel raised his eyebrows. I gave a small nod, bracing myself, and swiped it open. The first clip nearly made me drop it. The wedding reception hall was captured in grainy detail, chandeliers swaying overhead, guests frozen in their seats. My mother's voice cut through the hum, sharper than glass. You pushed her too far. Richard, you paraded her like a trophy and humiliated all of us. My father slammed his hand on the table, his face a furious shade of red. Do not put this on me. You begged for the spectacle. Valeria, you wanted the horses, the choreographer, the fireworks, the magazine spread. You never cared about Trevor or Hannah. This was all about you. Gasps filled the room. The camera jolted as my Uncle Robert stormed into view, his finger stabbing the air. Stop it. Both of you. This family has rotted for years because of your lies. You erased Claire, treated her like a stranger. And now you're standing in the ruins you created. The clip ended with chairs scraping, someone shouting for them to calm down. The sound of glass shattering as Valerie shoved her chair aside. I sat frozen, my pulse hammering. For decades, their fights had been hidden behind closed doors, smoothed away for photographs and polite dinners. Now the world had front row seats. Daniel leaned closer, his jaw tight. They cannot hide anymore. Another video loaded immediately. Outside the reception, cameras flashed as my Aunt Caroline stumbled toward a waiting car. Her face was streaked with mascara, her shawl clenched in shaking fists. Reporters shouted questions. One voiceover explained she had quietly accepted money from my grandfather's estate under the contested will, money that never belonged to her. The caption across the bottom was merciless. She took what was never hers. The heaviness in my stomach spread outward, pressing against my ribs. Evelyn's words about the true will echoed again. Caroline had known. She had profited. She had looked me in the eye and carried on like nothing was wrong. More alerts poured in, the screen flooding with screenshots from Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. The words blurred together in repetition until they etched themselves into my brain. Justice for Claire. I whispered it aloud. Half in disbelief. Justice. For me. Daniel slid his hand over mine. You're not invisible anymore. I scrolled again, and a stitched video appeared. A young woman sat cross-legged on her bed, her voice shaking with anger as she looked into the camera. Think about it. The sister who carried the family, who paid deposits, who endured years of being dismissed, was cut from the wedding, and now she's free in Paris while they implode. She has been the victim all along. The comments rushed past. Impossible to read them all. Still, some burned into my chest. Finally, someone said it. Protect the sister, not the bride. She deserves peace. They scapegoated her for years. My throat closed. I set the phone down before the tears spilled. But they came anyway, hot and unstoppable. Daniel pulled me against him. His arms tight. His voice steady. It's all right. Let it come. I buried my face in his chest. His shirt dampening under the weight of sobs. I couldn't hold back. I wasn't crying because of pain this time. I was crying because strangers I had never met had spoken the words my own family never would. When the sobs eased, I laughed weakly, wiping my cheeks. They tried to erase me, and now the world is writing me back in. Daniel kissed my hair, his voice low and certain. They can never take this from you again. I leaned into him, letting the sound of the city drift through the open window. The bells of a nearby church tolled, folding into the rhythm of traffic and voices and bicycle bells. Paris kept moving, alive and indifferent. But inside me, something shifted, breaking open like sunlight after years of gray. The weight of being unseen, of being treated as background, was gone. It hadn't been lifted by my family's apology. They would never give one. It was lifted by truth, spoken aloud by strangers who had nothing to gain. I picked up the phone again, calmer this time, and scrolled through one more wave of comments. Someone had written, the older sister was the victim. Always erased, always silenced. And still she rose. The tears welled again, but softer now, not sharp. They saw me. They finally saw me. Daniel's hand found mine again, firm and steady. I let the silence stretch, my chest rising easier than it had in years. For once, the story was no longer theirs to script. It was mine, and it had finally been heard. The quiet hum of the hotel room was broken by the trill of my phone, its screen flashing with a California number I didn't recognize. My first instinct was to let it ring out. After days of reporters and strangers trying to dig into my life, I had grown wary of unknown calls, but something in me whispered that this one was different. So I pressed accept. A calm, professional voice came through, warm, yet carrying the weight of someone who had rehearsed these words many times. Claire. My name is Ava Monroe. I served as your grandfather's attorney in Sacramento. My breath caught, my free hand gripping the edge of the desk by the window. Daniel looked up from where he sat on the couch, immediately sensing the change in me. He mouthed silently, "Who is it?" I held up a finger, my heart pounding. Ava continued, "Your grandmother Evelyn asked me to reach out. I need you to know that your instincts were never wrong. The will your grandfather signed in 2015 is valid, and it names you as the primary beneficiary of Monterey House and his shares in Whitaker Holdings." The words landed with a force that nearly buckled me. For years I had carried the uneasy suspicion that something had been buried, that my place in the family story had been deliberately erased. Now I had confirmation. I forced myself to speak, though my voice trembled. But I was told everything went to my mother and Caroline. A pause filled the line. Then Eva's voice lowered. After your grandfather passed, your mother persuaded me to suppress the updated will. She claimed it would tear the family apart. She argued that the older version was better for everyone. Against my better judgment, I let her win. And I have regretted it every day since. Daniel rose quietly and came to my side, resting his hand gently on my shoulder. I closed my eyes, trying to process the enormity of her confession. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because I cannot carry the lie any longer, Ava said firmly. And because your grandmother is right, the truth belongs to you. I have already prepared the paperwork to file with the Superior Court in Sacramento. The rightful will is being reinstated. Your mother and aunt will have the chance to contest it. But the document is airtight. Signed, notarized, witnessed. You are the legal heir. Claire. I felt my knees weaken, so I sank into the chair by the window. The city lights outside blurred as though the whole of Paris had shifted. What happens now? I asked. Now, Ava replied. The process begins. The estate and the shares in Whitaker Holdings that were stolen from you will be legally recognized as yours. It will not be quick. And your family will fight it. But this time, the law is on your side. When the call ended, I stayed frozen in my seat, staring at my reflection in the glass. Daniel crouched beside me, his eyes steady. Tell me, he said softly. I repeated Ava's words, piece by piece. Monterey House, the shares, the will my mother buried. The betrayal that had stalked me for years finally had a name. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice was gentle. You were right all along. They tried to erase you. And now the truth is pulling you back where you belong. Tears stung my eyes, but they were not bitter this time. They felt like release, like a weight, finally lifting after years of silence. We left the hotel and walked into the Paris night, letting the cool air wash over us. The cobblestones glistened with rain. The river shimmered under the lamplight, and the Eiffel Tower glittered in the distance. I moved as though in a dream, my steps lighter, even as my chest ached with the truth. At the bridge, I stopped and leaned against the railing, watching the dark current of the Seine drift past. I thought of Monterey House, its windows wide and sunlit, the garden my grandfather had tended with his own hands. I thought of the shares in Whitaker Holdings, the symbol of the work he had built over decades. They were mine by his choice. Not through accident or pity. Daniel slid his hand over mine on the railing. You don't have to chase their approval anymore. Justice is chasing you. I let the words settle. The truth of them, grounding me in a way nothing else had. For years I had begged silently to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be given a place. Now, without asking, justice was walking toward me. The bells from a nearby church chimed the hour. Across the water, the city sparkled like a promise. I whispered softly into the night, more to myself than to anyone else. Maybe justice has a way of finding me, even when I stop running after it. The river carried the words away, leaving only stillness behind. Back in the hotel room, I sat at the small desk by the window, the city's glow spilling across the paper in front of me. The night outside was alive with traffic and laughter, but the quiet inside pressed against me until I reached for the pen. I did not know what I was hoping to achieve. Maybe nothing. Maybe I only needed to see the words written, to let them breathe outside my body. Dear Mom, I began, my hand stiff, the ink bleeding slightly against the cream stationery provided by the hotel. Do you remember the year Hannah maxed out every credit card she had, and the collectors started calling the house? You came to me and said she was too fragile to handle the stress. You asked me to pay off her debt. Told me it was my duty as the older sister. I had just graduated. My salary barely enough to cover rent. But I did it. I drained the savings I had built through years of work, because you said family came first. The pen scratched across the page as memories surged. Do you remember the summer after Dad's accident? When you said Hannah was too upset to face the bills? You slid the medical invoices across the table toward me and asked me to figure it out. I was 22. Terrified. But I made the calls, arranged the payment plan, and shouldered the blame when Dad snapped about the numbers. You said I was strong enough to handle it. Another paragraph formed, each word heavier than the last. Do you remember the day you showed up at my apartment with a stack of documents? You told me to sign the financial power of attorney because Hannah might need help getting approved for a lease. You said it was only paperwork. Nothing binding. Months later, I discovered my name on loans I never took. When I confronted you, you told me I was being dramatic, that it was family business. Nothing more. I set the pen down for a moment, pressing my hands against my face. My chest ached as if the walls I had built for years were cracking with each line I wrote. Daniel moved quietly around the room, giving me space, but I felt his presence close. When I picked the pen up again, the words spilled faster. Mom, I see now that I was never your daughter in the way Hannah was. I was the safety net, the substitute parent, the steady one you could lean on while you poured all your softness into her. I spent years trying to earn from you what you handed her without asking. And every time I tried to speak, you told me not to make it about myself. The paper filled, line after line, memory after memory, the forgotten birthdays, the piano recital you missed because Hannah had a fever, the college acceptance I turned down because you said Hannah needed me close. Each detail poured out, years of silence finally breaking. When the last line came, it was simpler than the rest. Asking you for love was like asking the ocean to be dry. It was never going to happen. My hand trembled as I set the pen down. I stared at the letter. The pages scattered across the desk like fragments of a truth too heavy to carry inside me any longer. Daniel stepped closer and rested his hand gently on my shoulder. May I? He asked. I nodded. He picked up the pages and read them in silence, his eyes moving steadily, his brow tightening, his breath slowing with each paragraph. When he finished, he laid the papers down carefully and looked at me, his voice low but steady. You have already saved yourself. Claire, you don't need her recognition to prove that anymore. Tears welled, but did not fall. Instead, I felt a deep calm spreading through me. I gathered the pages, stacked them neatly, then tore them down the middle. The sound of paper ripping was louder than I expected. I tore again, and again, until the words were nothing but shreds in my hands. I walked to the window and unlatched it. The night air rushed in, cool against my damp skin. I opened my fists and let the pieces scatter into the Paris breeze. They floated upward, first, then spiraled down toward the street. Fragments of a story no one needed to read. Not even her. Daniel came to stand beside me, his arm slipping around my waist. We watched the pieces drift away, caught in the glow of headlights, swept into the current of the city. I whispered, almost to myself, I think that was the last letter I will ever write to her. Daniel pressed his forehead lightly against mine. And that's enough. We stood there in silence as the city pulsed below, my chest lighter, my hands empty, the weight of unsent words finally gone. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, painting the walls in pale gold. I padded barefoot across the room and opened my laptop, more out of habit than intention. My inbox was already overflowing. News alerts, subject lines screaming about the Donovan wedding meltdown, articles shared across platforms with thumbnails of Hannah's tear-streaked face frozen mid-yell. I clicked one link and found myself staring at a cultural podcast episode already live. The hosts were dissecting every second of the chaos, their voices sharp but fascinated. One of them said it felt like the perfect collapse of a carefully curated American fairy tale, a story of privilege cracking open under the weight of its own lies. They spoke about sisters, scapegoats, family secrets, and in every word, I felt the echo of my own life. Daniel wandered in with 2 cups of coffee. He set one down by me, then leaned over to read the screen. His lips curved wryly. Looks like you're a case study now? I half laughed, half winced. It felt surreal to hear strangers discuss my pain like it was a cultural phenomenon. But at the same time, something inside me loosened. For the first time, my story wasn't just gossip whispered behind closed doors. It had become something larger, a mirror for others to see their own wounds. Scrolling further, I saw an article on the front page of a major paper. The headline read, "The Donovan Wedding and the Crumbling of Old Family Myths." The writer traced the way wealth and secrecy created fractures that eventually shattered in public view. My name wasn't printed, but between the lines I existed, no longer invisible. Then, my eyes caught a new email. Subject line, simple and direct. Invitation to speak. I opened it carefully. Dear Claire, my name is Harper Lee. I am a cultural correspondent with CNN. We've been covering the Donovan wedding fallout and the discussions it has sparked. If you would be open, we would love for you to join our podcast to share your perspective. Not as gossip, but as truth told in your voice and your timing. No pressure. Warm regards. Harper. I read the message 3 times. My pulse slowing with each pass. Daniel noticed the stillness in me. What is it? I turned the laptop toward him. He scanned the email and gave a low whistle. That's not tabloid junk. That's real journalism. I nodded slowly. For years, my story had been twisted, ignored, rewritten by others. Now here was an invitation to tell it myself. Not as a burden, but as testimony. Later that afternoon, we walked along Rue Claire. The stalls overflowing with flowers and cheeses and fresh bread. Paris buzzed around us, alive and unconcerned. I held Daniel's arm and let the rhythm of the city ground me. For once, the chaos of home felt like it belonged to another life entirely. At a cafe, we stopped for lunch. Sitting at a small table on the sidewalk, I pulled out my phone and skimmed the financial news. Whitaker Holdings had begun to plummet, its reputation battered by the very scandal my family tried to keep buried. Analysts speculated about board resignations, about shareholders demanding answers. In every line I read, the name Donovan was no longer gilded but tarnished. Daniel noticed the faint smile tugging at my mouth. What is it now? I handed him the phone. He read the headline, then set it back down, with a small nod. Consequences. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was relief. The quiet sense that the universe didn't always look away. Sometimes it let the truth run wild until it found the people who had tried to cage it. By evening, the sky above Paris had turned a dusky lavender, the Eiffel Tower glittering to life in the distance. I sat at the window with the email from Harper open on my laptop. The words were simple but powerful, an invitation. Not a demand. Daniel joined me, handing over a glass of wine. You don't have to say yes, he reminded me. I took a sip, staring at the skyline. I know, but for the first time, it doesn't feel like a burden to share. It feels like proof that I survived. I closed the laptop without replying. Content to let the offer sit. My story had already been spoken by strangers, dissected by analysts, spread across screens. But now I had the choice to shape it myself, and that choice was power enough. As night folded around the city, I leaned into Daniel's shoulder, watching the lights ripple across the Seine. My family's name might be crumbling, but mine was finally free of their weight. For the first time, my life wasn't a secret shame. It was a lesson. One the world seemed ready to hear. Veexlater. A crisp envelope arrived in Seattle, embossed with the seal of the Superior Court of California. I sat at the kitchen table of our new townhouse near Lake Union, the quiet hum of the city floating through the windows. Daniel poured coffee into 2 mugs while I broke the seal with careful fingers. Inside, the words confirmed what Ava had promised. The court recognized the 2015 will as valid. Monterey House and my grandfather's shares in Whitaker Holdings were legally mine. For a long moment I just stared at the paper, years of doubt, of wondering if I had imagined the betrayal, dissolved into the clarity of a court ruling. Daniel slid a mug in front of me, his eyes searching mine. You finally have it in writing, he said softly. I nodded. a strange mix of grief and relief rising together. Justice never came quickly. But it had come. We had chosen a modest townhouse instead of anything grand. Tucked close to the water, where we could walk each morning before work. The wood floors creaked just enough to feel lived in, and the back deck overlooked the lake, where kayakers drifted by at sunset. After Paris, we wanted something real, something that felt like ours, not a stage for anyone else's approval. I set up a small writing desk by the window and filled it with stacks of notes, drafts of speeches, and the beginnings of a manuscript. Daniel often worked at the dining table, sketching out designs for new projects, his pencil moving in slow, steady arcs. We fell into a rhythm of cooking simple meals together, music humming low in the background, laughter spilling into the spaces where silence used to weigh heavy. Then came the invitation that changed everything. TEDx Santa Barbara. The theme was reimagining boundaries, and they asked me to speak. At first, the thought of standing on a stage, telling my story to strangers, made my chest tighten. But when I practiced the words aloud, something shifted. This time, I wasn't asking for validation. I was offering a truth I had already lived. The day of the event, I stood backstage with the microphone clipped discreetly to my collar. My palms were steady, my breathing even. The host introduced me, and I stepped onto the red circle under the warm lights. Rows of faces looked up at me, but I didn't feel exposed. Ifet anchored. I began with the simplest line I knew. No is a full sentence. The words hung in the air, and the room leaned closer. I told them about the years of being the fixer, the reliable one, the one erased until I was only useful. I spoke of the night in Paris when I finally realized I didn't need to rescue anyone but myself. And I told them that boundaries were not walls, but doors. The kind you could choose to close when love became control, and to open again when trust was real. When I finished, the applause rose like a wave. Not frenzied, but warm, steady, real. Backstage, Daniel was waiting, his eyes bright with pride. "You did it," he whispered. I smiled. No. I lived it. In the weeks that followed, the talk spread online. Messages arrived from women I had never met, telling me they finally said no to family who had drained them for years, or that they had chosen themselves after decades of being told they were selfish. Each message reminded me that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to anyone who had been silenced, anyone who had been erased. At night, Daniel and I would sit on the deck overlooking the lake, the water shimmering under the city lights. Sometimes we talked about the future, about where we might travel next, or the home we might build someday. Other nights we just sat in silence, letting the quiet remind us how far we had come. I thought often of Monterey House, still standing in California, its shutters weathered but strong. One day, I would walk its halls again, not as a guest but as its rightful heir. For now, it was enough to know it was mine. Not because I had demanded it, but because justice had finally been restored. Looking back, I realized I had never needed to save Hannah's wedding, or my mother's image, or my family's pride. What I needed was to save myself, to choose peace over performance, and truth over silence. And if you have ever been left out, overlooked, told you were too much or not enough, I hope you hear me now. You do not need to rescue the parties they build on your back. You only need to rescue yourself. If this story touched something in you, share it. Leave a comment. Subscribe. And stay with me here, because together, we can keep telling the truths no one else dares to speak.